the truth is out there if we take the time to look, but I'll tell you where the answer always lies, right here in the heart. Okay? This is a direct connection to that, always. And when you walk in alignment with that, you will have that light in your heart in such a way that you will never ever make a bad decision. You know, I don't use my brain anymore, Jay. I understand that my brain can get me in trouble. I lead with my heart at all times and I stay in the present moment. I don't leave my past. I don't leave my future. I stay right here, right now. And when I stay here, right now, there are signs all around me every day with where God wants me to be and who I need to talk to.
You're listening to Inspire Me with Jay, where science meets spirit and stories of meditation and the near death experience awaken what's possible within us all. I'm Jay, and this is your moment to be inspired. Welcome to Inspire Me with Jay. I'm your host, Jay Spillers, and I have a guest today, David, who had a near-death experience, and it basically shaped everything about his life, and now he teaches how to do heaven on earth. And why don't you share the backstory to your near-death experience, which helps us understand it?
Sure. Well, let's first start by saying my first legal name is David, but I go by my middle name, Thayne. And that was an important demarcation for me in my life experience because I always identify David with the broken child that was severely abused. So I go by my name, Thayne. I usually, if somebody calls me David, it's from early on in my life when they knew me as a child. So when you said David, it was a little weird for me because I don't typically hear that anymore. Anyways, Jay, thanks for being here. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to share a little bit about my life and some of the things that I've experienced. So I guess I would start with a little bit about myself. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. I was born into an amazing family. I have a wonderful, loving father and amazing mother. I had an older brother and a younger sister, and I was the middle kid, right? The one that everybody's always worried about, the middle kid, right? So my life was pretty normal up until about age 4 or 5, and that's what I would share because I lived in a really nice, cute little lower income neighborhood in the east part of Phoenix. And I know when my parents moved onto that street, they never thought for 1 second that bad things could happen to me on that street. But unfortunately, that's what ended up finding me at about age 4 or 5. I started being groomed by a boy in my neighborhood that I now know was also being abused. But at the time, I didn't know what grooming was, and I had no idea when anything, around intimacy or anything was like. So my first experience as a child with intimacy was one of violence. And, there was something that happened in that moment that also made me realize that I could never talk about what that was or how it happened. And I don't have to go into a lot of details except to say that that one incident at age 4 or 5 is what kept me silent later in life when I was actually beginning to be abused by adults, not other children. So my life for me changed, Jay, July 4th, 1976. That was a date that my brain had blocked from me almost my entire life. And it wasn't until a suicide attempt late in life that I realized I had some very severe damage from my childhood, but I also couldn't really remember what had happened to me or specifics of the story. Like I knew that there was ugliness and darkness in my past, but I didn't have specific recollection of who and what and when it began. That didn't happen until after a suicide attempt when I actually started working with a therapist and a technique called EMDR, which is how I was able to uncover a little tiny sliver of a memory that then ultimately unlocked my entire childhood. So let's go back to July 4th, 1976. It was the bicentennial of our country, and it was an important day celebrating as neighbors. And we actually had a block party where the street was blocked off, and it was root beer and homemade root beer and hot dogs and hamburgers and bicycle parades. And it was a beautiful day. Well, later that evening, I they had a pinata that the kids busted, and one of the kids broke it open, and I grabbed a bunch of candy, and I shared a room with my older brother, Gary. So I decided to run home, and I left my family about 5 houses north of where I lived, and I ran back home to hide the candy. And I hid it from my brother, and as I was walking out the front door, I realized that the neighbor had just gotten home. That was a little unusual because the cars were not allowed on the street. And so I noticed it and realized that they had actually gotten home. So I went across the street and I knocked on the door to collect money for a bottle of honey that I had sold for a school fundraiser. And when I knocked on the door, Mrs. Dellenbeck didn't answer. It was her husband. And they were an older couple. They had moved into my neighborhood about a year prior. And I had been over there several times raking their leaves. My mom would have my brother and I rake their leaves and do, yard work to tire us out. But it was also a nice thing to do for our neighbors. So I wasn't afraid of them, but I also wouldn't say that I felt like I knew them as such. So when Mr. Dellenbeck answered the door and explained that Mrs. Dellenbeck wasn't home, I explained that I just needed to collect the money and give him this bottle of honey. So he stuck his head out the door and did one of these kind of things. And I didn't know what he was doing at the time, but he was checking to see if anybody had seen where I was at. So he invited me in and said, I've got the money in the back room. Follow me. So I had no reason to, believe that anything bad would happen to me. And I followed him down the hallway, down the door, and then the door got shut. And then my life completely changed. My innocence was completely stolen from me. And it was violent and it was ugly and it was extremely fast. And I remember as a child trying to process and understand because I had never experienced anything like that, especially from an adult. But sadly, it didn't stop there. The gentleman that lived catty corner from me was also in cahoots with another man who lived in my neighborhood who actually lived behind me off the alley. In East Phoenix, we have alleys that run through the streets for garbage collection. And so this man was a janitor for the church that I grew up in. I was a member of the Mormon faith back then. I'm no longer a member of that faith. But as a child, I was raised LDS. It was been in my family for hundreds of years, and that's what I knew. So what I also didn't know was that somehow the man that lived across the street and the man that lived behind me that I knew through church knew each other. How they knew each other, I never figured that out. But sadly enough, these two individuals, as well as additional adults, ultimately abused children in that neighborhood for a number of years. So it started out for me at age 8 and it lasted until I was about age 14. And it was more severe. It happened quite often, especially during the summer months. I was a latchkey kid. My parents were mostly at work. And then I also need to share that I was severely threatened. Most abusers, when you're a little kid, you don't have all the decision making that you might have as an adult. And certainly I didn't growing up in a little neighborhood in East Phoenix and a little Mormon family. I didn't never been exposed to anything like that. So of course I didn't quite know how to process it, but they were very adamant that if I said anything that they would abuse my little sister. And she was 5 years old and I was raised as a Boy Scout and I knew that I didn't want what had happened to me to happen to my sister. So I made the decision as a child to never speak about it. And sadly, pedophiles are really good at filling the minds of children with lies, but we don't know the difference. So I adopted the stories that they told me, that I would be taken from my family if this ever got out, that my sister would be harmed if I told anybody, and I kept that secret. So I tried living my life like everybody else, but sadly, the damage that was done to me as a child developed something called dissociative identity disorder. And it's actually a condition that happens when children are abused at a young age, generally in a severe way and generally in a repetitive nature. And it's actually a coping mechanism. My brain did what it was designed to do. It protected me. And it protected me by eliminating memories from my brain, which for many years of my life, I could not tell you what happened to me. And I could not tell you much from my childhood either. And that was my brain protecting me. The other thing my brain did is it began splitting. That's what DID is. And if you think about it, I would be abused at home or after school. And then the next day, I would have to go as if nothing had happened. So when you do that, eventually the mind begins creating personalities that are separate from the self. It's kind of where DID comes from. So ultimately, for me, I started splitting at a young age. But the sad thing is with DID that once the brain begins splitting, it will split throughout life, depending on what's necessary in order for the individual to cope. So I had DID and I didn't know it. And in fact, most of my life, I knew I was different. I knew I was different as a child because I felt things. I knew things. I could feel things around me that weren't in my field of vision. And I knew that. But I was also raised in a religion where any kind of talk about anything like that was considered, demonic and of the devil. So even though I knew I was different as a kid and I could experience and feel things, I never really developed or played with the knowledge and the abilities that I had because I was led to believe, that it was evil. So my first near-death experience actually happened at the hands of a pedophile because they abused not only me, but they abused other little boys that I went to church with. And sadly enough, three of those boys actually have all taken their own lives from what happened to us. And one of those boys died at a young age from HIV before there was even a cure or they really even knew what it was. So tragically, four lives have been lost in the church that I attended because of what happened to us. And as far as I know, I'm the only guy that's still alive that remembers what happened to us, which is also why I have an active lawsuit against the LDS Church. And my goal is to someday use whatever money that I get from that to generate income for a nonprofit because that's what's important to me. I want to be able to teach what I've learned as close to free as possible. In order to do that, it takes money. You can't just teach for free. So I'm hoping that through the case that I've got going, that somehow I can come away with the funds that I need to be able to teach what I've learned and share goodness back with the world, which it so desperately needs. So, my first near death experience happened at the hands of a pedophile that had given me too much drugs. They would sometimes drug us as children so that we weren't necessarily present and we were easily manipulated when we were on something. So that led to addictive properties later in my life, which I always wondered where addiction came from. Well, it came from being introduced to medication as a child that I should have never been given, but was sadly given by adults as a way to manipulate me. So at one point, I had been given something that was too much. And I remember being in a scenario where I saw another child that was foaming at the mouth. And I knew that I had been given the same thing that this other child had been given. So I knew that it probably wasn't going to be a good thing. And then, kind of the next thing I noticed, I had left my body and I was actually in the corner of the room. And what I mean by that is that my abusers were trying to revive me by putting me in basically a bathtub of ice. And because they had overdosed me. And so my first NDE was actually that instance when I left my body and I went to the corner of the room where I was located. But what was strange was that when I left my body, everything kind of changed around me, and that included people. So I found myself in a space, that's the best way to describe it, where there were multiple light beings that were present, and one of them was a spirit that I easily identified as my grandfather because I had known him a couple of years prior. He had passed away. But this first time that I crossed to the other side as a child, it was him that was there for me. And I have very vivid memories of him holding me while I was being abused, while the pedophiles were trying to revive me and bring me back from the state that I had entered. So I remember watching them from the corner of the room as they feverishly were trying to wake me up and revive me. And the whole time that I was there, I was surrounded by love. That's the thing that I like to really focus on, because I know a lot of people have a fear of dying, and they have a fear that when they get the other side, if I haven't made good choices, it's going to be a different path and I'm going to maybe go to hell. So I think, even as a child, I was familiar with those concepts, but I did not experience that at all. What I experienced was the most profound love I had ever felt. And then specifically from somebody that I had knew or known in my physical life, but that was now holding me in a spiritual way. And it's hard to explain that, but that's how it felt and that's how it looked for me. And I wanted to stay. I had a conversation with my grandfather, and he was very clear that I did not belong here right now and that I had many important things that I had to do and accomplish with my life, and that my time was not up. So, despite my pleading, ultimately, my grandfather literally like pushed me back into my body. And so, my first NDE happened as a child at the hands of a predator. From that, I also developed some skills, because once you've been on the other side, it's hard to explain, but you just begin connecting to the world in a different way. It wasn't the same for me. And what I mean by that is I learned how to leave my body when I was being abused so that I wasn't present. That's also what led to the development of dissociative identity disorder, because I would dissociate so that I wouldn't be present when people were hurting me. So that was my childhood. I tried to outrun it. I was fortunate enough that I married an amazing woman that I met in college, and I tried to outrun it like everybody else did. I never said a single thing to anybody, not one person. I sucked it up and I dealt with it, and I tried to outrun my trauma like most people do that experience trauma. But the challenge is that until you deal with that trauma and you process it appropriately and effectively, it's going to haunt you the rest of your life. And that's sad, but that's true. The amazing thing is, though, is that we can all heal from this trauma, and that's kind of what I do today for a living. Is I teach people how to overcome not only trauma from their past, but self-limiting beliefs that have been placed there by living difficult lives and writing stories at a young age that were incorrect, because that's where self-limiting beliefs come from. There's something that happened in our childhood where we didn't have the mental capacity to understand long-term decision making and cause and effect. We didn't have that as children. So we wrote a story. And unless we had emotionally intelligent parents that taught us when we fall down, we can stand back up, and that negativity and failure is nothing more than feedback. If you're not taught that, ultimately you start writing the wrong story. And the wrong story also gets embellished by you throughout your life, because most people don't realize that when we recall memories, we're actually rebuilding them. We're not going to a hard drive and picking it up. Our brain has to rebuild the memory. So that means the feelings, the senses, the sights, what you can remember, it's going to change as your life changes. But sadly, our brains are designed to protect us, they are designed for safety. And because of that, oftentimes the very system that keeps us safe is also what gets us stuck. And a lot of people shared that with me, and that's how I felt. I was stuck in life. No matter what I did, I could not get ahead. I would beat my head against the wall. I would go to church. I would say my positive affirmations. I would do everything, but yet my life was still difficult and challenging. So a lot of that came from, again, these stories, these self-limiting beliefs that I had told myself as a child, but also from this disorder that developed in me from being abused as a child. So ultimately, I was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, bipolar 1, big manic, big lows. I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, which is dissociative property, and then lastly, severe ADHD. So I had a lot of things that I had to deal with while growing up as a child and then a young adult and then into adulthood. But here's the weird thing about my case of DID is that I I was never aware of the others being present. So when you have a condition like DID, sometimes the alternative personalities are not co-conscious, meaning they're not aware of the other personalities. And that's how mine was organized. So throughout my life, I would find myself in peculiar situations where I might be talking to somebody and I switched in the middle of the conversation and I don't know them and they don't know me, but yet I was skilled enough in my communication ability to hide it or change the course of the conversation so that people didn't know that I had actually switched. So, what were my 10 personalities? They were different ages, they were different orientations. You can imagine how that would impact a married man married to an amazing woman with kids, but yet I'm also identifying as somebody different that's not married. It was really chaos for my wife, and that's also one of the most beautiful things of my story is the incredible woman that I was so fortunate to marry that loved me unconditionally through some of these challenges. And my wife and I burned together, and that's also why today we have a really, really amazing marriage. And but it's definitely a marriage that we worked through. And I think that's important to point out. So my last near-death experience, Jay, happened late in life for me. I had begun seeing a therapist after a suicide attempt, and that was the first time in my life that I had told anybody that anything had happened to me. And true story, I was actually saved by a little boy that I sat next to when I was a young kid. I was in the Phoenix Boys Choir, and a little boy that sat next to me almost 30 years, 35 years later was a grown man that saved my life when he saw a text message that I had sent and he realized that I was in trouble and he saved me. That's when my family found out. That's when my parents found out what had happened to me as a child. And I began therapy. And it was hard. And I'm grateful for therapists. I'm grateful for what they do. I wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for that first therapist and a protocol called EMDR, which is what helped me unlock my past when I had a memory surface, which was the red, white, and blue ribbons in my bicycle spokes from July 4th, 1976, the day that I was actually severely hurt by the man across the street. So I tried to outrun it like everybody else, and traditional therapy was helpful, but I found myself being over medicated. That is a common solution that our medical community has good intentions, but it's also common for people with challenging mental conditions to be over medicated. And rather than helping you heal from it and process the emotions and the memories that are there, that's the answer. We'll just give you a pill that'll make you shut up, that'll make you be monotone, because that's what the pills had done to me. And at one point, Jay, I actually had 7 pill boxes. I had pills to wake me up, pills in the middle of the day, and pills to put me down. And I had 7 pill boxes. Today, I have 1 pill box, and I'm on no medication, and I haven't been for a while. I actually did a controlled um, reduction of all my medicines later in life when I realized that I was never going to heal when I was fully medicated the way that that community had me at. So I made that decision that I needed to go off my medication because I knew that I would never heal unless I did just that. There was an event, Jay, where I had been given some medication by a physician, and I should have never been given that medication. I had a severe allergic reaction to it. We know that now because I had a gene, it's called a gene site report. I highly recommend everybody order that if you're taking any kind of medication that involves the psychiatrics or any of the heavier medicines. I suggest that you get that report because it can actually be free, but your doctor has to order it. So the medication that I was given, I should never have been given because I had an allergic reaction to it while swimming. And I was alone. It was late at night when it happened. And the best way to describe it is as I had some sort of seizure while swimming. And I ended up losing consciousness. And I literally woke up, Jay, at the bottom of my swimming pool. Like I did not have an immediate understanding of what had happened or how I ended up in the pool. But I woke up looking up and seeing the moon, and I could see that the waves were lapping on the top of the water. And interestingly, you would think I would panic, but I didn't panic. It was like a peaceful feeling as if I had been placed there lovingly, because I'm like suddenly awake at the bottom of the pool and I realized that I got water in my lungs and my body's not moving. And I knew at that time that something had happened. I had been somewhere because of that experience that I had as a child. I remember going there. And so I had that kind of peace knowing that I had just been someplace, and that if I remained calm, there might be a way for me to live because I wanted to live. I didn't want to die, and I didn't know how I ended up in the water in the first place. So I remained calm, and I just remember getting a thought in it, and I mean a thought that wasn't mine. It was planted in my head, and the thought was that I needed to tilt my neck and move my head up. And when I did that, Jay, there was a bubble of oxygen that had been caught in a pocket that exists inside of my neck and esophagus. Okay. And the reason I share that is because that only existed because I had cancer about 5 or 6 years ago. And when I had cancer, they removed my thyroid. And then I had a golf ball size and a large marble size tumor. So when they removed an infected thyroid that had enlarged, I had reached a point where I could hardly turn my neck. That's how big it had gotten, which is ultimately how we discovered that I had it. So I dealt with cancer. Have a very weak immune system today because of the radiation and the things that I had to do. But I was alive, and I was grateful to be alive. But what I didn't know was how important that pocket that was in my esophagus would be when I actually drowned in the pool. You see, most of my life I lived it from the victim perspective. I showed up as a victim. I was angry at the world. I was always kind to my family and friends. But if I didn't know you and you crossed me the wrong way, you would resent knowing me. I wasn't the nicest person, and I'm not proud of that, but I own that, and that isn't who I am today. That's for darn sure. But back then I was angry, and I was angry from what had happened to me. I was angry that nobody knew. I was angry because I didn't know how to get the anger out of my heart or out of my body, and it consumed me. It really did. So this near death experience for me gave me a complete reboot of what happened, because when I came out of the water, Jay, I didn't immediately swim out. My body was not engaging with me. It was like I was in it, but giving it commands to swim, but the body was like, yeah, whatever. Like I didn't have any energy. So I essentially floated to the top. I wiggled my way up, and I just remember literally surfacing and gasping for air and beginning to get the water that had been in my lungs. I made it over to the side of my pool. I have a little shallow area, and I laid there on that step for a good hour, and I really wasn't able to move. I was conscious, but what was strange was my fascination that immediately began with the stars and the moon and the cosmos. And I also knew, Jay, that I was different. And what I mean by that is when I came out of the water, I could see the altars in my mind that had never been present before. So what I mean by that is when I had DID and I was co-conscious, or they were not co-conscious, I had these personalities that existed in me, but I did not know that and I wasn't aware of them. But when I came out of the pool, my brain was not organized the same. And now suddenly I could see the lives and the memories of multiple people that existed in my brain, but that wasn't who I was. I was somebody different, literally different. So that happened back in August of 2023. And I had to start over like immediately when I got out of the pool. For a good week or so, my speech was horribly slurred. I ended up in a hospital watching me because I was also acting extremely peculiar. When I came into the house, that next day, I was fascinated with things that made no sense. Like I would go up to the sink and turn on the water, and I would watch the water go down the sink. And I was fascinated. I would stand there for 10 minutes watching the water run. Meanwhile, my family's watching this, like that is literally lost as marbles. They had no idea what had happened, by the way. They had no idea that any of that had transpired. What they saw was a very peculiar father acting in peculiar ways. So it didn't stop there. I became fascinated with molecules and little tiny things. So I started studying like thermodynamics and heat and cold. And what's weird, Jay, is I am a finance guy, a real estate guy, and a sales guy. That has been my academic college experience, not in science, not in molecules, not in atoms, but that's what I became obsessed with. So it led me on a path of discovery. And I realized that I was given something, and it's like a bank of knowledge. And that's the best way for me to describe it is I have knowledge that was placed into my head that involves many scientific properties and theories and things, but I did not learn them. They were given to me. And I spent the last, almost 3 years unpacking what happened in that NDE and then being able to recall and remember things from while I was on that other side. So it did not immediately all come back to me. And frankly, I'm still unpacking it. There's still things that I'm still recalling and remembering, or somebody might ask me a question. And if I don't know the answer immediately, if I ponder with it, I'll figure out what the answer is. And it comes from this bank of knowledge that somehow got deposited in my head. Okay. So I started studying neuroscience. And I realized that if I needed to heal myself and get better, that maybe I should look into neuroscience. And specifically, I was also fascinated by math. And the reason I share that, and before everybody rolls their eyes, is because I learned on the other side that our cosmos is in perfect balance. That's also where my obsession came from with the stars and planets and earth and nature, and understanding that nature exists in perfect balance always. So the language of the universe is actually math. And that's something that God shared with me in my NDE. If you want to get to the sun, it's a mathematical equation. If you want to understand how gravity works, it's a mathematical equation. So the language of the universe is actually math. And here's the key thing that comes from that. We as human beings are made up of atoms and molecules, physical matter, the same physical matter that exists in the universe outside of what we call Earth. So if the laws of math can be applied to physical matter there, what would happen if we applied the laws of math to physical matter of what is called human emotion, right? Because human emotion is actually electrical energy in motion in the human body. So I started getting this, again, understanding from my download of what I call the equation of life and abundant happiness. And what it is, it's an understanding that if we apply mathematical principles to our own lives, that it in fact can create perfect balance and what I call a state of net neutral. And net neutral is where abundant happiness lies, and net neutral is where you find God. Okay, that's the truth. God exists in a neutral state, and we can actually achieve that neutral state here by living mathematical principles. So, how it works, Jay, is it starts with addition. We learned the mathematical things as children. We learned that here in the United States, kindergarten, first grade, second grade. You're going to learn the basic operators of math. And the first thing they teach you is addition. Okay. So addition in the equation of life and abundant happiness means I add those things in life that bring forth goodness and joy. That's addition. Subtraction is about letting go. It's about letting go of those things that don't help us, that don't serve us, that bring forth negative energy. So, what does God expect of us? God expects us to balance. That's on us. That is our job, is to balance our emotional energy in any given moment. But the problem with that is most people are not aware. They've developed a bad habit of not being present. Think how often our minds wander when we pick up our cell phone, when we think of that conversation that we had 2 years ago that we're still replaying over and over because we can't let it go, or we become obsessed with things in our future and it creates an anxiety. That's all a bad habit that a human being has learned because they've not mastered how to stay present and on task through focus. So when you understand that, the first thing that I learned is that in order to help myself heal, I needed to become more aware. So I figured out a way to train my body to become more aware. And it's actually done through cognitive pattern interrupt. And it's a sequence that I can train anybody in about 24 hours. And you're going to become aware of how your brain is spending your time. Okay. So getting back to that equation, add and subtract. What God expects us to do is to balance. What comes next is multiplication. Multiplication is when we take our action and our intention, and with our own work and our own energy, we align it with love. Multiplication is about making decisions in love. And when we make decisions in love, with the greatest outcome being the most benefit to people, we cannot make a bad decision. And that's true. So, what is God? God is also a multiplier. And we know that because if I take $100 and with action and intention balanced and I'm aligned with what I'm trying to show God, I can engage the higher power of God. God sees what I'm doing. I get that through prayer. And if you don't believe in prayer, then believe in manifestation. Believe what you want to believe, but you can create it and it multiplies, it gets bigger. So now that $100 is $1,000 because it got bigger in the equation of life. So here's the thing that's important for people to understand. When we create goodness in the world and we create what's called abundance, we are also in a responsibility when we create money and wealth. And what I mean by that is we're supposed to operate on what's called the principle of abundance. That's what we're supposed to be operating here on earth. And the principle of abundance is based upon a value that comes from your heart. So what I mean by that is if I originally had $100 and I made 1,000 and I need $700 to pay my bills, okay, of that 1,000, that that $700 is my minimum. Every single one of us also wants to have a sense of safety because we understand that life is not always to the minute, to the every time. There's going to be ups and downs. So we need a little bit of safety. So, what is that level of safety for you? That answer lies in your heart. So, understand, I'm not saying that you cannot be wealthy. I'm not saying that you have to give all your money away. I am saying, however, that once you are an abundant person, anything above and beyond abundance is excess, and it's supposed to go back into the system. That's what God wants us to do. Unfortunately, we're in a society today where we have the most extreme of wealth we've ever had. We have our world's first trillionaire, and yet we have people in foreign countries that don't even have running water. So that's the problem in our world today. And the middle is missing. Well, that middle is missing because we're not putting the excess back into the equation. Because after multiplication is the next operator in life. It's called division. With division, we're taking the expanded abundance and I'm sharing it with my fellow man. That's what God wants us to do. Take that excess that I don't need and share it back with the very people that helped me create it in the first place. That is how the world is supposed to work. But we're not doing that. The other thing that division means, Jay, is division is the ability to share burdens as well. Because sometimes in life, when we are thrown things like maybe a death or something in your family, we have to lean on other people to carry the burden. That's actually division when we share the burden with other people to help us pull through such things as grief. All right. So add, subtract, multiply, divide. Everybody knows the four operators of math and how they can be applied to having what's called an abundantly happy life. But here's the secret, Jay. The secret lies at the equal sign. And the equal sign is something called gratitude. And why that's important is because gratitude is how you change your life. Gratitude is how we are supposed to be living, but we're not. So I want to dig into gratitude and why that's important because at the end of the day, everybody wants to live an abundantly happy life. I think if anybody said, Thayne, what's the one thing you want for your children? It's for them to be abundantly happy. The same thing that I want, the same thing that we all want. Well, how do we get to abundant happiness? Well, we get there by living in gratitude. Literally, when I died, the most important thing that I learned was the power of gratitude as not only a way to live, but a way to heal. That's really important for people to understand that because gratitude is actually neuroscience. So I poured myself into neuroscience and I had a moment where I walked out my backyard and the sunrise was so incredible, Jay. I took a photograph of it and I posted it on Nextdoor. And I had a bunch of neighbors tell me how nice it was to see positive social media. But then the other thing they shared was how beautiful their lives were and what they were grateful for. And the word gratitude showed up. So I had written the first part of the equation of life and abundant happiness, but I didn't quite understand how to power it. And that's when I learned gratitude. Once again, God has worked in my life in mysterious ways. And understand, I use the word God. That is something that each and every human being gets to define for themselves. Okay. And I have my belief system. I know who and what God is. But that's something that everybody also needs to learn on their own. And to do their research and to study and to pray and to kick the tires and really question the things that many of us were just kind of forced into believing. I had to go through all of that. But after my near death experience, I came back with full knowledge of how everything works. Literally, Jay, I have so much knowledge in my head about how life works. Beings of light, is reincarnation real? Where do spirits go when we die? What is the state of the soul when they die, and why does that matter? Those are all things that I understand from my near-death experience, and I live my life today in a way that promotes what I learned on the other side. Okay. So specifically, gratitude is the secret sauce. And I know when I say the word gratitude that there are people out there that are rolling their eyes because I was one of those people. When somebody would say to me, Thayne, you need to be more grateful for what you have in life, that was like salt in the wound, especially to somebody that had been traumatized as a kid. It's also used often by parents against their kids. And it's become a weapon, which is sad because gratitude is actually the most important thing that we can learn. And when we learn it, and more importantly, we live it, we learn something that's incredibly important, right? And that's a phrase that I call dare to be second. And what I mean by that is when you live in gratitude, Jay, it takes courage. And what I mean by that is it doesn't mean that you won't be first in life, and it doesn't mean that you can't choose first. But what it does mean is that you've changed your perspective. And anytime you have an opportunity to stay in second place and experience joy from second, you should do it and let somebody else take first. That's the honest truth. And when you live that way, suddenly life takes on a completely new meaning because it's balanced. Let me explain that. God puts us first, which means God is actually what? Second. God is serving from second position by putting us first. So on the left side of the equal sign in the equation of life and abundant happiness, God is second and we are first. How do you balance that equation on the right side of the equal sign? It is with the opposite. It's just math. So what does that mean? That means, and for us to have a balanced life that works perfectly with God, we have to put God first and us second. That is how we achieve perfect balance. So when we live in gratitude, we adopt a different way of living. And specifically, it's life changing. And Jay, I've been blessed in many ways in my life. I'm thankful for that. I'm not rich by any sense of the word. I have what I need, but I'm grateful for what I have, and I give a lot of things away to people because I do operate in abundance, and if I don't need it, I give it away, and it brings a lot of joy when you can give back, and put things back into the system of where it came from. It lifts your own spirits. Okay. So I had an event, Jay, one day where God was teaching me again. I once I connected with God out of the pool that last time, my connection with God is quite strong and it's very, very deeply connected. I walk with God every day, and I know that God is still teaching me. So a couple years ago, I had an experience with gratitude that completely changed my life, and I'll share it briefly. I had tried to learn gratitude by writing lists. And I literally, when I took that photograph of the sunrise in the morning, I posted on Nextdoor, and I decided that very next day that I was going to get up and watch the next sunrise. In fact, I was going to watch that sunrise for 365 days. So I walked down into the park near my house. I went live on Instagram. I don't know anything about podcasting, and I thought I would share with my family and friends this discovery that I had about this word called gratitude, and how grateful I was to be able to celebrate sunrises, because for most of my life, I didn't give a crap when the sun came up and when it went down. Didn't care. Okay. After that experience, I started out on day one, and I wrote a list of things I was thankful for. And that lasted a couple of days. And then I got impatient with that. And then I moved to an app, and I thought, well, I'll learn gratitude by using an app. And it was a good app, but unfortunately, Jay, it made me irritated. I felt like I was getting pinged by my grandmother and I wasn't being grateful enough. And so I let it go. So now I'm struggling. I understand add, subtract, multiply, and divide and how to put that in my life, but I didn't know gratitude the way that I wanted to know it. And then one day God put somebody in front of me, and that one person completely changed my life, and I'll share that. So I at the time was working designing luxury backyards for people. So I got to travel all over the city, and one of the beautiful things is meeting people in their homes. You get to see how they live. And I met many people that had very, very strong beliefs in various different religions. I met Mormons, I met Catholics, I met Jewish people, I met Muslims, I met Buddhists, I met everybody, and everybody claimed to have the truth, and everybody claimed to represent God. So when you think about all of that, it sets you on a path of, well, really, who is God and what is this all about? And I was still trying to figure it out. So one day I'm on the west side, and I needed to use a bathroom. And as simple as that sounds, when you get on the west side of Phoenix, there's more riffraff. And so a lot of the public restrooms aren't open. So literally had just driven an hour across town, and I needed to go to the restroom. And I had been to two other restrooms, two other convenience stores, and they were either closed or the facilities were broken. So I pulled up on the side of a fast food restaurant, and I was literally, Jay, about to wet my pants. And I grabbed the door, and it was locked. And I'm like, how is this served breakfast, and why is the side door locked? And then there was a sign that says, for security purposes, they don't open this side door until around 11 o'clock. And it was around 10 in the morning. So the woman in the front sees me, she points to the front door. So I immediately turn, go in the front door, and as I'm walking in, she gives me four numbers: 4263. And I did not know what that was. I did not know that I needed that number. I was only interested in getting back to that bathroom before I humiliated myself. So I got back there and realized that that nice woman had actually given me the code to the bathroom that I desperately needed. So I took care of business. I came out feeling like $1 million, which is common after you really got to go. And I was in a euphoric space, and I thought to myself, okay, maybe this is how I learned gratitude. And so I walked up to this woman, and she was the only person in the entire restaurant, and she was standing in the front. And I said to her, I had her name, and I said, Carla, I said, my name is Thayne Martin, and I know you don't know me, and I don't know you, but I need to thank you today from the bottom of my heart. And the reason I need to thank you is because I know you think that you're just selling hamburgers, but you're actually touching people's life, and you touched mine today. And so I shared with her a little bit about my childhood and how humiliation was something that was a horrible trigger, and it could actually ruin my day. and it could ruin weeks if I let it. So the fact that this woman, out of the kindness of her heart, without making me buy something at the register, she gave me the code, which meant that I didn't have an accident, which meant that I didn't humiliate myself, which meant that I could go complete my appointments and I didn't have any further issues with my employer. So I knew at that point that I needed to do something. And I carry $100 bill in my wallet, and I carry it because I give them away. Okay. I give $100 bills away when I feel the need, because I don't need that money. That's why I carry it, is to give it away. So in this particular instance, this woman had touched my heart. So I grabbed that $100 bill and I showed it to her. And I said, Carla, I need to share something with you. I know that fast food is probably not where you're going to be. In fact, I know you're going to be incredibly successful in life because of the kindness that you have in your heart. And I want to acknowledge the goodness that you represent. And so I said to her, I'm going to give you this $100 on one condition. And the condition is that you spend it on yourself, because you've deserved it and you should spend it on yourself. But I also asked Carla that if you don't need that $100, something tells me that you're going to give it to the next person in line that needs it more than you do. And at about that time, I started crying because she was crying. And I had my hand on that bill and she had her finger on the other end of that bill. And I let it go. And she's like, "Are you for real?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "I'm just incredibly thankful for your kindness." And then I got something, Jay. I got something I've never felt before. It felt like tingles. It felt like my entire body was now engrossed in the most incredible feeling of love I had ever experienced. And then it reminded me of what it was like to be in the presence of the Almighty, the Creator. And I recognized that feeling. And I realized that was how I learned gratitude. So I tried to repeat it, and I realized that it takes a very specific protocol in order for the body to release these healing chemicals, what actually heals me. Because after 3 days of this, Jay, I had a fundamental shift in my consciousness. Okay. And what I mean by that is anything negative that came into my field of view, I suddenly resisted. And they were things that I normally accepted. But because my brain had literally rewritten itself into positive neural pathways, the negative thought that my brain tried to send me wouldn't work. Okay. So I suddenly realized that neuroscience and gratitude is actually how we can heal ourselves, because over time it completely healed me of any and all mental health conditions that I have. Now, understand, I have to be careful when I use the word heal. I can't tell people that I heal them. What I can do is teach you, and you can heal yourself. Okay. But I would tell you that you want to do everything, of course, with your physician's approval. But what I'm going to teach you is actually neuroscience, because that's what I've studied. I became an expert at understanding how to rewire our subconscious minds. And it's actually done with the most important word in the world. It's gratitude. Okay. So, out of my near death experience, out of everything that I went through in my horrible life, it is that gratitude is how we can live. Gratitude can heal us, it heals our hearts, and it can also heal the world. It's about respect. When we use gratitude, it's giving somebody respect. If somebody is negative with you, reply back in gratitude. Thank them for the feedback, thank them for their anger energy. You remain calm, cool, and collected. Stay in gratitude and watch what happens. That anger will diffuse itself immediately. Why? Because it takes two people to tango. And if you choose gratitude, this thing that you don't understand yet, but you will if you take my course, is that gratitude actually makes our amygdala quiet and it increases activity in our prefrontal cortex, which is where we can make rational decisions. The amygdala is the fight or fear response, right? So, what I've learned is that fear is fear is fear is fear. So, what I mean by that, Jay, is that the fear of getting hit by a car is the same fear of, say, standing up in public speaking. The only difference is the person who observes the fear and assigns the degree of the fear. You see? So ultimately, I learned how to rewire my brain and learn how to live in what I call abundant happiness. And I knew when I died in that pool, Jay, that I was given a second opportunity to come back. And I also knew that I had to share what I've learned. And that was part of the reason I came back, was to share what I've learned, not only for myself, but for anybody that wants to learn. I want to make something really clear, Jay. I don't come on here to sell courses, okay? I really don't. I work with people on a donation basis because it takes a lot of time and a lot of emotional energy from me to help teach you these principles and be able to understand them. And there's also some important things that come along with that because this is shadow work, Jay. And when you're dealing with shadow work, you want to work with professionals and you want to work with people that understand that, because balancing is something that's going to happen for everybody. But once you learn how to balance in the present moment, you're going to live like I do, which is abundantly happy forever. So that is my story.
So, like with the presence, is a lot of these things like presence and gratitude are
Mhm.
things that people do in meditation. Is meditation part of what you do?
So 100%. I meditate every day, and meditation is going within, right? Like there are three things, and I always share this with every audience. There are three things that you must master in order to return home, as you define whatever home is. Okay. These are the three things. The first one is, do you know and understand unconditional love? Can you make and demonstrate that you know right from wrong always? That's one of the first questions you have to know and demonstrate. The second thing is subtraction. That's where most people get caught up in heaven, especially during life review, because they realize how often that they held on to negative energy and negative feelings. And it's hard for people to do. It was super hard for me to let go of the feelings I had to the people that hurt me. But I can honestly say today that if my abusers were alive, I'd give them a hug, because chances are there were some ugly things that happened in their life. And that's true. I don't know that for a fact, but I can assume that based upon what happened to me. Okay? So subtraction is about letting go, and it's something that keeps most people from being in the presence of the creator. All right? And then the last one is, can I find God from within? And that's exactly what it means. And what I mean by that is, can I find God on my own without a religious framework, without somebody showing me what to believe and who to believe? You have to do that on your own. It is a personal journey that we are all on, and we can all get there. But those are the three things that you literally must master. Okay. And when we do life review, that is when you're going to realize that everything that we do is tracked and accounted for. And God does that through sound and light. That is how our lives are recorded here on earth. Okay. So when you're experiencing life review on the other side, the way that it works is you experience it from the perspective of everybody else in the moment. So, what I mean by that is heaven is magical. And when I did life review, I did it in the presence of God. God stood with me as I went through my life review. And what I mean by that is God creates your life in front of you and you're in it and you can turn around in 360 degrees as if you were just experiencing it as you were here on earth. And but what's different is you see it and you're in it, but what you feel isn't your feelings. What you feel is in the hearts of the people that you interacted with. So, what I mean by that is if you created negative energy in the world, what I felt was the negative energy from the heart of the people that I hurt. That is the truth. That is the balancing. So every time I did things in my life that weren't good or made bad choices, I could see how I hurt those people and I felt that pain. And trust me, that's not a fun thing. It's not fun. And you don't want to experience that. But understand that the negative things that happen in life are merely teachers. That's all they are. That's something that's really important, Jay, is for people to understand that the negative things that happen in our lives are there as teaching and feedback. Okay. I grew up with a hateful relationship with God. I believed that God was mean and that if I didn't live up and live every single rule that I would be going to hell, I wouldn't be in his presence. And I had a bad relationship with God. But what I found was a God that was loving, a God that was kind, a God that had a sense of humor. I mean, to me, I was shocked that God had a sense of humor. Like, literally, I was watching parts of my life and looking at some of the bozo stupid things that I did and laughing. And you know who else was laughing? God was laughing. God was laughing with me because I was laughing at myself. So, what does that mean? Judgment is from you. Okay. I didn't need to be judged by God because God was standing with me. Okay. But I judged myself. I didn't need God to judge me. I knew my own right from wrong, especially by the end of it. I knew everything that I had done well, and I had also got to experience the good things that I had done in my life. You know, when my mom would send me down to the little old lady at the end of the street to mow her lawn and not get paid for it, I wasn't super happy as a kid, but I did it, didn't I? And what I got to experience was the love of that little old woman who got to see a little young man come down and mow her yard and drink a glass of lemonade and just spend a little bit of time shooting the crap on the front porch. And those were good times for her. So understand that everything in our lives are recorded by light and sound. Every molecule in existence is known by God and tracked by God. So that's why it's critical when we're here on this side and we have a body that we make good decisions with that body. And if we've lived a life that was negative, here's the beautiful thing: you can let that go. That's subtraction. That's forgiveness. That's repentance if you're a Christian. Okay? That's letting all of that stuff go so that I can stand free and clear and what? Neutral in the eyes of God. Because God is ultimately neutral. And that's the truth. So, of everything that I've learned, the most important thing is the importance of staying in second place. That's what I teach people. I say that phrase every day: dare to be second. And when you put gratitude front and center in your life and you live it as a framework, you will be in first place. Your life will be abundant and you'll be grateful when you die and you have a life review that is balanced. Okay? That is what you want. You want balance in life. You know, if you lived your life perfectly and you never experienced sin and you never did anything negative or bad, guess what? You're also going to get some learning on the other side because negativity is a teacher. So I'm not saying that sin is a good thing. I'm not saying that. But sin is what? A teacher, isn't it? It's feedback. So everything has a high and a low. Everything has an increase everything has a decrease. And that's something that God also showed me, is that everything in life exists on a wave. Literally, everything comes from waves. And when waves compact, they create matter. Okay. And that's where sound comes from, and all these things that we've learned from, physics properties. Science is the language of God, and I'm just this peculiar guy that has studied it and understands it, and I'm grateful for my life. I'm grateful for my opportunity to share what I've learned. And most importantly, I still have hope in a future because I know it's not too late. If we put gratitudes in our heart and we live from here with the light right here and we protect that light, then we can heal this world. And that's what I'm trying to do, is put gratitude back into every conversation. Every conversation I have begins and ends in gratitude. And when you do that, you're going to find what I have, which is abundant happiness. And I wouldn't change it for nothing. Nothing.
So, like, um, good and evil
Hmm?
obviously have things to teach us, because a lot of times, like you think in religion, they're always like, well, always want the good, and then the
Hmm?
evil's over here. We don't want that. But it's like they both play a role
They
in
are part of
teaching us
balancing,
that.
right? Our jobs, Jay, is to learn how to balance our emotional energy. Our emotions are what create our human experience. So if you're not good at managing your emotions, that's also why your life experience is difficult for you. And that's true because our emotions are our soul, you see? And think about it. When you die, the feelings that you have come from your body, don't they? So when you're on the other side and you no longer have a body, does that mean you can't feel? That's correct. You need a body to create a feeling. Do you understand why it's so important to come to Earth and to get a body and to learn how to understand and use these feelings and use them while you're here and you have a body? Because when you're on the other side, you don't have a body. The body is the input mechanism for the soul. Okay. That's why we come here. So, I was a guy, I have tried suicide multiple times in my life. There's no way nothing would ever happen today. There's no way, man. I'm too dialed in. I know what life is about and I can't wait to return. I'll say that, but I'm going to get there naturally. My goal is to be 100. My grandmother lived to be 102. So I'm hoping I can live to be a centenarian. So I take good care of my body. And ultimately, I teach alignment. Okay. I teach that you have to have a sound body. You got to take care of the input mechanism. That's important. If your body's not healthy, it affects us, it affects our souls. So you want to get a healthy body. You want to have a positively programmed subconscious mind. That is done through neuroscience and rewiring your subconscious to get it out of the negative way that we have programmed it and learn how to program it in what we call balanced thought. It's a way of thinking, and it's something that anybody can learn and anybody can live that way. The next thing is you got to have a solid soul. Your soul needs to be in alignment with your subconscious mind. It also needs to be in alignment with your body. And the last one is, of course, your source of love. So, is that God? Is that Jesus Christ? Is that one and the same? Is that Allah? Is that one of the many thousands of God that exist in the world religions? That's up to you. But the truth of the matter is that God only knows one word, one language, and it's called love. And when we operate in love, then we are operating of God. And we are operating out of love. We are not operating of God. And that is as simple and as basic that it needs to be. And any interpretation beyond that, that's up to you. You get to figure that out. I just know that when you look at all the things in the world, I want to hang my hat in a place where everybody's welcome. Okay. That's the truth because God does not exclude, God is inclusive. So, where do I hang my hat and my time? In places where everybody's welcome. And that's the truth.
So yeah, I was going to ask, like, what is your relationship with religion now? Is it sort of like is it sort of like you could see the positives there, and But
I
you
have
could be
a
anywhere.
I
You could be with
I have a
Catholics or
completely different understanding of all the world religions. Here's what I would say. I am OG. That is what I would say. Okay. And what does OG mean? Original God. I'll let you figure out what that means. Okay. That is the religion. I believe in God. I believe in the original God. Okay. And if you study and you look and you kick the tires and you pray and you ask and you ponder, you will get the answers that you're looking for. But it comes from within here. Okay. So deep meditation, great way to find it. There's an even faster way to find it from within. And you can do that with gratitude. That's also true, right? So is meditation part of my day today? Yeah, I usually spend about 30 minutes a day meditating. It's part of my normal day, but but my key to success and happiness in life is living in gratitude for sure, right? I want to visit one thing you asked me earlier because I don't think I quite gave you the answer about good and evil. And I want to touch on that because um people often say, well, Thane, where does evil come from and why is it here? Okay. And that was something that I had to ask as well, because on the other side, I had every answer because all knowledge is present on the other side. There's no time there. There's time here, but not there. But okay, so when I say all knowledge is present, what I mean is you still have choices. You still have agency. You are still energy on the other side. When we die, we lose this input mechanism, but the energy lives on and goes to the next level where you can experience everything that you can't experience in the physical matter when you're here on earth. So evil exists, Jay, and it comes from man. It comes when that expression, the natural man is the enemy to God. That's 100% accurate. Okay. Negative things that happen in this life come from ego driven people. And that's the honest truth. The man that decided to steal my innocence, that was his choice. That was his decision. Okay. Some people would say, oh, he was tempted. No, he wasn't tempted. It was his choice. Okay. When you blame something else outside of yourself, you're doing yourself a disservice. How about owning up to the fact that every decision that you make in this life is your decision? And don't blame it on something else that's, quote, tempting you. That's false teaching. Okay. That's false teaching. So, what I'm saying is, we make choices as human beings, and all God's trying to do is to manage the chaos that exists from human beings that haven't quite learned how to walk in alignment. And that's the truth. So the negative things that happen here happen because of mankind and the choices that the egos make. So what is God doing? Protecting you the entire time. Most of my life, I was a victim, Jay, and I showed up that way. And I saw every reason why God didn't exist and why God didn't care about me. But after I died and I experienced the ultimate love that exists from that highest creator, no, man, God is nothing but love, 100%. And the worst things that happen to us are the best possible outcome. And if it wasn't for the grace of God, it would have been far worse. And that is the truth.
so like in terms of demons and Satan, do you believe that are those basically personifications of darkness within
So,
us?
yes, that's a great way to put it. Okay. Demons, demons are souls that have passed on the other side that were not capable of passing life review and entering in the presence of the one. Okay. So that person is kind of in a space of existence where they don't have a body anymore. and they have to try and learn what they should have learned in this life. And the only way they learn it is by observation or taking over what? Your body. Okay? So, evil spirits, people that die in this life in a negative or an evil way, they're still negative and evil on the other side, even though they know everything, which is kind of hard to believe, but that is the truth. So the negative, are demons real? Yes. And if you don't take care of your heart and protect the light that you need in here, then yes, it's possible that another spirit can enter and take control of your body and use your body. And they do. That's what demonic possession is. It's a possession of your soul by a negative spirit that died negative and is still trying to figure out how to get to the light. And that's the truth. That is the truth. So, do I believe in Satan? No. I believe in Satan as a metaphor. And if you study, you'll realize that that's exactly what it meant, right? Satan is mankind, it's our ego, right? That's the truth. One thing I teach is something called the principle of absence, Jay. And it kind of goes like this. In the very beginning, there was nothing, nothing existed. And then God created light. There you go. Light, absence of light. That's what God created. Light, absence of light. Man entered the picture, and we couldn't accept the fact of light and the lack of light. And so we labeled it and we called it dark, and we created fear. And mankind uses darkness and fear to control mankind. That's the truth. That's not what God wanted. That is not what God wanted. So, how do you fix it? You return to neutral. Okay. What is the absence of love? Nothing.
Fear. Oh.
Nothing. It's neutral. The absence of love is actually neutral. That's what God wanted to show us. But we created hate and we assigned it a further degree than neutral. That was created by mankind. That's my belief.
Hmm. But do you think like people that do you think a lot of times pedophiles actually are demon possessed?
I think that's possible. Yeah, that's possible. But it can also just be a person that's making crap choices. Let's be real. How many times did I make a bad choice? Many times. Do I own up to it? I do now. But at the time, no. I was just an ego driven person driving my ego instead of listening to my heart and following the light. That's the truth.
Hmm. You said you got downloads on a lot of different things. Like, did do you believe there's life on other planets and things like that?
I do. Yes, absolutely. There is life on other planets. I mean, God is everything and everything in existence, and that includes the other planets. And God does have other worlds where people exist. Yeah, absolutely. It's
Hmm.
actually one of the things that you learn. Like, so heaven is how can I say this? It's kind of layered in knowledge. The more knowledge you have, the more you understand when you get on the other side. Okay. Um, so that's also something. Like I did not believe in reincarnation prior to my near death experience, but I do understand reincarnation today, and it's an evolution of our souls. And trust me, that's a tough one to admit to. That's the honest truth, because I was not raised that way. I was raised that you had one chance and this is it. Okay. And the truth of the matter is that if you came to earth and you lived it correctly, you could get it all done in one chance. But the reality is, most of us are not capable of that. And that's why we go back through life review. And when we don't get it right, we get a plan put together, right? That plan get put together with God and you and your light family, right? We have DNA in us that's light, and we have DNA in us that goes with our body. We have two sets of DNA. So on the other side, you know what light family you're part of. because we're all one big gigantic family. And that's the truth. We're all cut from the same source of light. There is only one source of light. Okay. And we're all part of that light. And we all want to get back to that light. And we can get back to that light. But reincarnation is how the soul is perfected. Okay. So what does that mean? So somebody like Jeffrey Dahmer, that was a serial killer that murdered people, was his life review difficult and ugly? Uh huh. Why? Because he experienced the horror and the hell and the feeling as every person that he hurt. He got to experience that. Yeah, you're darn right he did. Now, did Jeffrey Dahmer learn from that experience and then go on to heaven? No, he didn't. Right? So, what does that mean? That means at the appropriate time, that spirit will come back with a new plan. And that plan is something that is put together by God, you, and your light family. And then you come here and you play that agreement and you live your life. But trust me when I say every human being will experience every facet of life. Okay? We don't understand time the way it actually exists, right? We don't. We think we understand time here, but we really don't understand time. But it's only relative to the experience of life on Earth and in our solar system, because time does not exist on the other side and the other dispensations. It does not exist. There is no beginning, there is no end. It just is, right? When you go back to the Bible, right? There's many things in the Bible that are accurate. Many things. There's also a lot of things in the Bible that are not accurate. And it's pretty easy to find if you start studying. Literally, I can't tell you how many people I meet when you start asking why they believe what they believe. They couldn't really tell you. They were just raised in it. Oh, so have you ever read the Bible? Yeah, like literally every word? Okay. Have you studied where it came from? Like the history of the Bible, and that there were other books in the Bible that were also removed from the Bible? That might be worth looking into. The truth is out there if we take the time to look, but I'll tell you where the answer always lies, right here in the heart. Okay? This is a direct connection to that. Always. And when you walk in alignment with that, you will have that light in your heart in such a way that you will never ever make a bad decision. You know? I don't use my brain anymore, Jay. I understand that my brain can get me in trouble. I lead with my heart at all times and I stay in the present moment. I don't leave my past. I don't leave my future. I stay right here right now. And when I stay here, right now, there are signs all around me every day with where God wants me to be and who I need to talk to. And He does it through glimmers, right? I have evidence that I'm walking in the path that God wants me on every day. And if I don't see those glimmers, the first thing I ask is, have I done anything, absorbed anything, said anything that would cause my heart to darken? And if so, then I need to apologize. I need to fix it. I need to put positive energy back into the world to neutralize the negative of which I created. That's true. You have to neutralize the negative energy that you created in life. So, how do you do that? By doing good things. So, if you've lived a difficult life and you've absorbed a lot of negative energy and you put a lot of hate and anger into the world, then change. Okay? Change today. Make the decision that today is a new day for me and I'm not a victim anymore. And I'm going to show up in life and take responsibility for my actions. And I'm going to follow God and light and this thing called unconditional love. And if I do that, I'm going to return. Yes, you will. Yes, you will. Right? So, have you ever wondered, Jay, why, like I used to wonder as a little kid, like, how come, I grew up in a little neighborhood. We were lower middle class. Okay. We got by, we didn't have a lot. My parents always did an awesome job on Christmas. Like, my parents would go, like, I had a magical Christmas. My parents were amazing. Even though we did not have much, our Christmases were spectacular. And that's something I still do today. with my family is I want to celebrate that day. It's an important day. Of course, do I celebrate Christmas? Of course I do. Yeah. But I can't express how important it is to forgive yourself, okay? And love yourself and realize that you can change, okay? You can change and you can overcompensate for the negative crap that you've created in your life today. Start today. Change your heart today. Walk forward in goodness, make good decisions. That negative crap that you did goes away, okay? But every time you revisit, you bring it all back. That's also true. Part of forgiveness, part of subtraction is forgiving yourself. And that's something that we all struggle with, and I sure as heck did. I couldn't forgive the fact that I showed up and was an asshole to a lot of people. That's the truth. But I own that behavior today, and I work really hard not to be that way when I'm in the world. So, do I still get angry? Yeah, because I'm human and I have an amygdala. Okay, I will tell you, my amygdala is way more controlled today than it ever used to be. But do I still get mad? Yeah. But what I don't do is I don't get destructive. Most of the times when I'm angry now, I tell people that I'm angry because they can't actually tell from my actions and my body language. I had that much control over my anger, but I used to be horribly explosive. I'd go off like an atomic bomb. Not anymore. Now I just laugh. When crappy things happen to me, I just laugh because it's the best medicine, and that's the truth. What other questions do
And
you
that
have,
probably
Jay?
also, and that probably also goes back to being present too, is that when you sort of get out of alignment with presence,
Yeah.
then other things can creep in like anger and fear and all the
And
things
those
we
are all what?
really
Low
don't want.
vibration energies, right? Fear, anger, sadness, greed. Those are all low vibration energy. So if that's where you're living and that's what's adopting, look, the world is a mirror. Okay, I'm going to say that again. The world is a mirror. What you are inside is what shows up on the outside. And that is 100 billion% accurate. The mirror is how we show up. So when you see somebody showing up in the world in a negative way and they're putting negative energy, what does that mean? That person has negative energy in their heart and they're acting that way because they have unresolved negative energy themselves. And that's the truth. So, what does that say when you see somebody out there, being a jerk and not nice to people? That person has some tough things in their life. And that's why they're showing up that way. And that's also the truth. So, what does that mean? That means you love them and you help them understand that anger is an emotion that can be controlled. And you can make a decision right now to not use anger. That's what emotional intelligence is, right? That's why in my course, I teach I teach awareness training first because until you learn how to control the here and now, emotional intelligence is going to be out of your reach, okay? Emotional intelligence happens because the human being actually has 0.25 seconds. And that's the amount of time between when we have a stimulus of thought and when our automatic systems will generate a known script that we've used a billion times. You see, that's what our brains are. They're just repetition machines, right? We have what's called the default mode network, and that's where most people today live. They live with the default mode network running their life. That's your subconscious. Your default mode network is your subconscious. That's the same system that you use when you drive from point A to point B and you don't remember how you got there, but you got there. You made it through three lights. You don't remember the lights, but your subconscious did. And your body did everything it did based upon repetition. That's why we have 70,000 thoughts a day. 95% of them are based upon repeat and repetition. And our brains do nothing but scan a horizon, looking for things that could be scary. That's what the brain is designed to do, safety. The problem is most people's subconscious mind is full of negative thought because as human beings, we are naturally negative. right? We drive past an accident, we rubberneck. We got to see how bad they died. Okay. That's why we're attracted to it because negative energy is easy. Positive energy takes work. It does. So we have to balance our lives and we also have to learn to balance thought. You can't rewire your brain and then put away negative thought because if you do, you're going to have a negative brain again. And your negative brain is going to show all the triggers in your life where it's not working. But when you rewrite your brain and you put it into positive neuroplasticity and you literally rewire your brain, that's when you change. And now that brain is pointing out all the amazing things in your life. My reticulator activating system and my default mode network that runs in my brain today is positive. That's why I see glimmers and abundantly happy things everywhere I turn because I rewrote my brain and I keep it neutral. Every time I have a negative thought, I balance it with an equal amount of positive thought. That's just a habit. I can train that habit into you. And that's ultimately what I do with my course. Okay. My website, it'spurelove.com. I work on a donation basis. Okay. I don't work with everybody. There's a free 30-minute window you can book on my calendar. I'm happy to talk about my NDE. I'm happy to talk about your life and how what I've learned might be helpful to you. And ultimately, at the end of the day, yeah, I need to be compensated. But the compensation comes from your heart. Okay. It comes from you having skin in the game because this is hard work. And hard work, when I push you to do an exercise that you don't want to do, when you got skin in the game, you're going to do it. And that's the truth. That's why I refuse to work for free because free doesn't work when the rubber hits the road and things get hard, right? And that's the truth. And anything worth having is valuable and you have to work for it. And that's also true, right? So I don't do this to get rich. I do this to help people. And my goal is to hopefully, settle with a certain religious institution and be able to teach this as close to free as I possibly can through my nonprofit, which is actually already formed, right? It's purelove.com and it's purelove.org. Okay. There's a reason why I did it that way. Right. So I
Hmm.
I could not be more thankful, more grateful. Thank you for my life and for everything that I've learned. And I just hope that, I stand up to shed the light on the things that happen to us in the world. I stand up so that people know that you can be forgiven. I stand up to for people to know that you can have an abundantly happy life today. And that's by learning how to stay in the present moment, becoming aware, becoming emotionally intelligent, and then ultimately using gratitude and neuroscience to rewire our brains and using gratitude as the fuel for love the rest of my life. That's the truth. I have a bracelet I wear. It says gratitude, dare to be second. This is actually something I used to train people with. You're looking at it, right? You can actually develop a pattern sequence with a bracelet that can retrain how you think. Okay. There's 101 things that I use in my course, 101 cards, and they're digital. I put them on your phone. And then the cards are designed around kindness, unconditional love, gratitude, and awareness. That's what all of the exercises are designed to do. So when you show up in the world, you can't hide. Okay. And they're exercises that are going to make you think in ways that you've never thought before. Right. That's why I teach from experience because we only retain 10% of what we read, but we retain 90% of what we experience. That's why you're never going to read a book from me. I'm never going to write a book. Okay. I really don't want to write a book, but I can teach you this course through the exercises, and the exercises will heal your heart. And ultimately, you're going to learn how to use gratitude as neuroscience and you're going to rewrite your brain. That's what you're going to do if you want to. It's just, again, it's optional. You can take what I share with a grain of salt. You can throw it away in the garbage. That's up to you. This is my life experience. This is what has worked for me. And I'm abundantly happy, and I wouldn't change a darn thing. Not one thing. If I had to redo my life all over again, I would do it exactly the same thing. I would sign up for abuse. I would sign up for everything that happened to me. I would do it all over again, exactly the way that it happened, because I understand who I am today. And I'm grateful for that. When you have something like DID, it was something that was ugly for me, but not today. Not today, because today I have the memories of 10 different people, 10 different perspectives, masculine energy, feminine energy. I understand them all. That allows me to see things in the world that most people can't see, right? I'm kind of like a people whisperer when it comes to human behavior. I see everything, I feel everything. You can't hide from me. That's the truth. And that's why I'm good at what I do. I just enjoy helping people. And nothing makes me happier than getting a random message from somebody that says, Thane, my life is abundant and I have you to thank. Okay. And then I turn that back and I say, no, you don't. You don't need to thank me. You need to thank yourself. All I did was teach you how to do it. But in the end, it was you that did the work with your co-creator. And that's the truth. That's what I teach.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming on today. It was a pleasure to have you.
Likewise, I appreciate the questions and good comments. I like to stay active. So when you post this, Jay, if you just let me know if people want to post questions for me, I'll do my best to answer them. I'm a busy guy, but I try and answer them late at night before I fall asleep. So that's kind of how it rolls. So, anyways, thanks for your time. It's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.